Hi, everyone. Apologies for the delay in getting going today. Just a bit of a technical difficulty on our end, but we seem to have it sorted now. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to ARMA's webinar series. Today's session is an oversight fee consultation webinar. My name is Kayla Duty, and I'm a Senior Manager of Public Affairs with Canadian Strategy Group. It is my pleasure today to serve as facilitator and moderator for the webinar. And I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. ARMA works with Albertans from all areas of our province and acknowledges the Indigenous peoples who lived among and traveled through the land in the area currently known as Alberta. The relationship that peoples of Treaty 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10, Alberta's Métis and Inuit people, have with the land is founded on a deep respect for the environment. This connection forms the foundation of our responsibility and vision of inspiring a future without waste. Today's webinar will share information and answer any questions that may help inform producer feedback throughout the consultation process. To keep the time moving along smoothly, we will follow prior webinar settings where registrant audio functionality has been turned off. So that means to ask a question, we invite you to use the Q&A chat at the bottom, where questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. As a reminder as well, these webinar sessions are being recorded and will be made available on the ARMA website afterwards. With that said, I will now turn it over to Victor Dong, Director of EPR Operations and Change Optimization with ARMA. Over to you, Victor.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for ARMA's first 2026 Oversight Fee Consultation webinar. As Kayla mentioned, my name is Victor, and I'm the Director for EPR Operations here at ARMA. We really appreciate you taking the time to participate and share your feedback. And today we'll be walking through the 2026 fee setting process, how it builds on our framework from last year, and some of the key factors influencing the 2026 oversight fee. Our goal for this session is make sure you understand the approach, our numbers behind our fees, and to gather your input before finalizing our recommendation to our board. So to start, I'll provide you with a quick overview of what the consultation will look like. So our objective with our fee consultation process is twofold. First, we're looking to gather your feedback on key elements of the fee model and methodology before we finalize our recommendation. Your input always plays an important role in shaping how we approach oversight cost recovery for every year. Second, we want to provide you with early visibility into our preliminary fees so that you can plan for 2026 with greater confidence. We do recognize that for many of you, budgeting for 2026 may well be underway or in some cases already complete. Currently, October is generally the earliest point in our fiscal cycle where we can share preliminary fee numbers. The timeline does reflect both our reporting requirements to the government, as well as the time needed to ensure that the numbers we share is as accurate and reliable as possible for your planning purposes. That said, we have heard the feedback from producers about the timing of our consultation, and we are actively exploring how we can provide the information earlier for you. Before we get into the details for this year's consultation, I just want to quickly walk you through what that fee cycle looks like, especially for those of you who may be joining us for the first time. So the process kicks off every year when supply reports are due. For ARMA, that's June 30th in Alberta, and these reports give us the previous year's supply data. So for this year, that would be for your 2024 supply data, which forms the foundation for our cost recovery calculations. Currently, we're in the consultation phase, which is where we are right now. And starting this past Monday, October 20th, all the way through December 4th, we share our proposed fee methodology, and we give producers a chance to collect your feedback before we finalize the numbers. Following consultation, the proposed fees go through our board for approval, and final oversight fees are usually published in late February. Finally, the invoice for these fees is issued in April of every year, aligning with the start of our fiscal year here at ARMA. Overall, the cycle runs from the data collection to consultation, approval, and finally invoicing of oversight fees. And this is the structured approach we developed last year, and we believe is a transparent process for calculating and sharing oversight fee information. So now that we've taken a quick look at our cycle, let's talk about the principles that guide how our fees are established. These principles form the foundation of our approach. They ensure that the fees we set are transparent, fair, and they align with our regulatory mandate. Our fee setting objectives are grounded in principles outlined in our fee setting policy. This policy was developed and finalized last year during our first fee cycle. The policy that is publicly available on our website, and we're happy to send a link for anyone who's interested in taking a look. There's really 3 key objectives that guide how we set and review fees every year. First, is our ARMA's budget. We are authorized to establish and collect fees to recover the cost for EPR oversight. And equally, what's important to us is that the approach is transparent and well understood. We want producers to have visibility in how fees are developed, the assumptions we use in developing those fees, and we want to provide you with an opportunity for feedback. Second, we look at financial sustainability. The fee must cover the cost of oversight for us here at ARMA, which means that we need enough resources to effectively fulfill our regulatory obligations. This means maintaining the capacity to oversee the system responsibly while ensure we can respond to emerging risks, priorities, and operational needs. And finally, we try our best to make sure that the fees are reasonable, that they're based on our actual costs, and that there's fair allocation between both the single-use products packaging and paper program and our hazardous and special products program. As the system matures, we'll continue to refine our cost allocation approach to maintain fairness, transparency, as well as proportionality across our programs. So in terms of our fee setting framework, we began by looking at ARMA's budget. So we identified the total cost required to oversee the entire system. This includes our initial startup costs from when we built the system, as well as ongoing annual operating costs needed to maintain and administer the system effectively. Once we have our budget, we look at the total oversight cost, which is allocated between packaging paper products, or PPP, and hazardous and special products, or HSP. This allocation ensures that each program pays a proportional share of our total oversight expense based on the work and resource required in each area. And finally, within each program, we determine how these costs are distributed among individual producers. And that formed the basis of our fees. So for many of the producers, what you'll get is an individual producer rate. But for the process, we develop our budget, we allocate fees, and we figure out individual producer fees. When we look at our budget, or what we may refer to as our cost recovery objective, there's 4 components you'll see today that make up the cost for our budget. 3 of these will look familiar from last year if you participated in our last year's consultation, which would be the amortization of our startup costs, our annual costs, and financing costs. These continues to represent the foundation of our operating budget, covering the system startup costs, ongoing operational needs, and the payment of interest on funds borrowed during startup. Last year, we did have a 4th category for the reserve fund. That reserve has now been fully established, so there is no allocation of any new dollars to it for the 2026 fees. Instead, you'll see me referencing a new category, which is the surplus deficit adjustment. This captures adjustment that occurs when producers update or revise their supply report after fees has been set, and I'll speak on this in detail later. Just a note on amortization, 2026 does mark the 3rd year of our 5-year amortization plan that was confirmed and established last year. This ensures that gradual and predictable approach to cover those initial costs over a period of time. Once we have our budget, the next thing we look at based on our framework is that fee allocation. And this is looking at how fees are allocated between PPP and HSP. So during our review of last year, this is generally based on registration trends and growth across both programs. So essentially the number of producers. When we did our first year fee, we set the allocation at 86% to PPP and 14% to HSP. And this was reflective of the proportional share of producers in each program. So over the past year, both programs have continued to grow at a steady and consistent rate. So the number of new producers joining each program has remained proportional, which means neither program is growing at a faster rate. So given that consistent growth, we have not decided there's no need to adjust the allocation at this time. At the individual producer level, once we've established the split between the two programs, it is a similar fee structure as last year. So there's two parts to any producer's fee. Producer will either pay a flat fee or a flat fee combined with a variable fee. And the variable fee is dependent on your supply volume into the province. This year, we did update our recommended distribution between the amount of producers paying just a flat fee to the number of producers paying both a flat fee and variable fee. If you recall, for last year, when we went out for consultation, it was a 40% of producers paying a flat fee and 60% paying flat and variable. For this year, at the start of consultation, our recommendation is the 45% of producers paying a flat fee and the 55% of producers paying both a flat and variable fee. This shift reflects the changing profiles of producers entering the system. So we've seen more small and medium-sized producers registering over the past year. So the proportion of producers paying only the flat fee has increased slightly for that reason. In terms of the threshold for when the variable rate comes in, that actually remains unchanged just due to the increase in producers. So we are starting with a proposed 50,000 kilogram as the threshold for when producers needs to pay variable fee and 1,000 kilogram for the HSP. So now we've kind of covered how fees are structured and how we allocate them. I'll take a few minutes to focus on the key factors that is influencing the 2026 fee you'll see today. To start, I will give you an update on our startup costs. So as you may recall, if you were here last year, these are the costs covering our stand-up period, which is from November of 2022 when the regulation was created through March 31st of this year. And this is what we refer to as our startup period that you'll see on subsequent slides. So costs bucketed in this group includes all operating, capital, and financing costs incurred during our stand-up period. When we did our fee setting last year, we were still within part of our startup period, so it was a combination of actuals and forecasted numbers. At that time, we estimated the total cost to be around 13.4 million, and that is the number we used to build up our 24 and 25 oversight fees. And that 13.4 million is what I refer to as the amortization that to be recovered over 5 years. And that started with our 2024 oversight fee, and it will continue until 2028. Now that we've concluded our 2024 fiscal period, we finalized the operational and capital component of our startup costs. Since amortization is continuing until 2028, the financing portion is still a forecast for 2025 and beyond. But with all of these updates incorporated, our final startup cost now is roughly $12 million compared to that 13.4 million estimate. The variance of the 1.4 million is primarily due to lower than expected consulting fees, as well as the deferral of certain management functionalities within our registry system specific to the reporting of management requirements. In terms of where we are for this year, which includes both our 24 and 25 oversight fees, this table summarizes the combined results for 2024, which has all of our actuals and is available publicly on our website, as well as our 2025 oversight fee year, which has a mix of our actuals for the first 6 months and forecasted costs for the remaining of our fiscal. The categories starting at the left side of the table, some of these may look familiar if you were part of our consultation. The buckets for the category would have been similar. So startup costs, which makes up the first 3 rows, includes the operating costs related to startup, the capital costs, and financing costs. Our annual costs, including both operating and capital costs, the reserve fund contribution, which was filled and for this year, that I mentioned as part of our reserve fund last year, And we have a new category for this year, which is the surplus or deficit adjustment, capturing any changes from previous and current year based on producer supply reports. And in terms of the columns, you have our overall cost of for our current year, which is the next column over, and how that overall cost is allocated between PPP and HSP. Based on our 2024 costs and the most recent projections, we're not expecting any material surplus or deficit resulting from previous year reporting adjustments. We do have a small surplus for the current year projected surplus, which will go towards reducing the overall cost for 2026. And I'll talk a bit on the surplus adjustment in the subsequent slides. So the new component for this year is the adjustment, the surplus or deficit adjustment. And this is specifically referring to any surplus or deficit related to supply volume changing due to producer supply reports. And because oversight fees are captured based on the snapshot in time of reported supply data, any changes made after that point will just naturally result in either a surplus or deficit. We usually set all of our numbers in December ahead of our board meeting, and any surplus or deficit that's submitted after that does change supply volume will naturally be considered as a surplus or deficit. So there's two main drivers behind this. First, of course, is an adjustment to existing supply reports. So these occur when producers have previously submitted data that they're revising, generally due to reporting errors, or in certain instances, it could be due to regulatory updates that require recalculation. And the other bucket would be new supply volume. This represents additional material from producers who registered or reported after the original fees were set, but are still obligated to contribute to a prior oversight year. So since our last year was the first year we've had oversight fees, there were no surplus or deficit to consider at that time. Going into this year and beyond, supply reports and new producer registrations are beginning to introduce surplus and deficits into the system. And this is something that will just become a normal part of our annual fee setting process moving forward. So taking a look at what that means, for the PPP side, we did have a significant adjustment made to the 2023 supply report. And this was a negative adjustment, meaning a decrease in supply volume that actually had quite a material impact to the way we recovered our fees. So the 2023 data was used to establish both the 24 and 25 oversight fee recovery targets. The correction to the supply volume did create a noticeable under-recovery of our planned revenue across both years. However, we did see a healthy increase in new supply volume from new producers, as well as favorable variances in our operating and startup costs based on the actual. All of these factors actually largely offset the shortfall caused by the adjustment. So in our previous slide where we showed what our surplus deficit for previous year, it essentially netted out to about zero. On the HSP side, the surplus deficit looks very similar in terms of our ability to have brought in new producers, as well as the variance related to both our operating and startup costs. And there was no material adjustment, at least negatively, from the surplus to existing producer supply reports. And that's why we are anticipating a surplus for the HSP side of the program. So given those factors, let's get into what our 2026 oversight fee looks like. So before looking at the fees, I just want to touch on the point that we are currently using submitted supply reports for what has been submitted for 2024 supply reports. And our approach to using only submitted reports is to ensure that we do have reliable fee information based on confirmed data to minimize change. So this does mean there are producers who are expected to report but have not done so, which could increase the total supply volume and essentially lower oversight fees as more supply reports come in. Our team does actively follow up with these producers who have not submitted their supply reports. But I do want to highlight the majority of our large producers, those with the greatest influence on our total supply volume, have already submitted their data. So we don't anticipate any significant changes to overall supply volume and based on the figures we're using today for our 2026 fees. So what our recovery looks like for this year is that we're anticipating needing roughly 8.9 million for our oversight fee total recovery objective. Factoring the anticipated surplus, that would bring down the total to 8.7 million. So this table is very similar to the one I showed for 2025, where we have the categories of where we're anticipating we need to collect money for, and the split between the total recovery and PPP and HSP. The startup recovery amount on the first three rows does reflect the change between our actual and our forecasted amounts for allocation on recovery of startup costs. So this brings the annual requirement down to $2 million per year from the $2.25 million we needed previously. Our annual operating budget for 2026 is projected at 5.7 million, which represents a modest increase from our current 2025 estimate of 5.4. We anticipate starting to require capital costs of roughly 800,000 for next year, and this is primarily to build out our deferred registry functionality that was postponed during the startup phase. Altogether, this results in the following projected fees for 2026 for an individual producer. For producers in PPP, we're proposing a flat fee of $170 with a variable rate of 0.0340 per kilogram. For HSP, a flat fee of $350 with a variable rate of 0.1167 per kilogram. In terms of how this compares at the individual producer level compared to last year, for PPP, both the flat and variable fee rates saw an increase for 2026. So while our overall program costs remain consistent between 25 and 26, this increase in the rate is driven by the supply adjustment that happened last year from a specific producer who had an error in their supply report. That correction reduced the total supply volume going into 2026, which in turn increased the per unit cost when it comes to individual producers, since the same total program cost is now spread across a smaller supply base. So this change is not reflective of any new costs for producers in terms of what we're looking to collect. It's essentially a correction to what the 2025 rate would have been if the supply data had been more accurate at that time. So it's not an increase in 2026 per se, it's a realignment to the actual true cost recovery that based on the actual supply report. For HSP, we are seeing the opposite trend, mostly because there was no significant adjustment. And we actually see a reduction in both the flat fee and variable rate. So this is driven by our favorable cost position related to our operating costs, as well as our startup variance and any net new producers we were able to bring in between our last fee setting period. So based on that, our flat fee decreased by $120 from $470 to $350, and the variable rate decreased by about 15%. So looking at the supply volume across the programs, we are seeing a slightly decrease in the amount of overall volume reported between the 2023 and 2024 reporting years. So the difference isn't significant at a system level, and the volume comparison graph highlights the impact of that correction as well. So if you look at the PPP graph, in 2023, our fees were set based on a reported supply of about 259 million kilograms. With that producer correction I mentioned in the previous slides, our true supply should have been around 230 million. So the year-over-year change between the supply report for PPP is actually only about 4 million less. But because the way the rate was calculated using the 260, this is why you saw the increase in the per producer rate I mentioned earlier. Taking a closer look at our planned capital work. So these are the 4 areas that are the key enhancements to the registry you can expect over the next few years. So next year's capital budget that you saw of 800,000 will fund specific functionalities within specific areas of these 4 buckets, and is not really focused on any specific one. So we are starting to prepare building out our management reporting functionality, with the management report coming into effect starting in 2027. As we mature and grow out our compliance process, we'll need to build a number of our compliance processes directly into the registry to strengthen the operational workflows. We're looking at opportunities to how we can enhance the verification and the audit process for supply reporting, as well as eventually for management reporting. And we're doing some expansions of our internal reporting capabilities for analytical needs. So these really form the roadmap for our IT build for our registry over the next 4 years. And finally, before I move on, we did explore the possibility of enabling pros to pay oversight fees on behalf of producers. So this is something we talked about last year as well. This is something we've scheduled for development as part of our 2026 capital budget, intended to provide that convenience for you as a producer, giving you the ability to have your pro manage your reporting obligations as well as payments. That being said, the pros have not confirmed whether they plan to make payments for the next fiscal year. This does depend on each pro's internal policies and how they choose to manage their producer responsibility and financial process. So we will only proceed with the development if there is the interest and uptake from pros. Should any pro does decide to participate, we'll certainly let you know that that option is available to you as a producer. Just a quick reminder on our payment terms and interest policy. Producer has a 60-day payment period to make your payment once our invoices are issued in April. And we enforce a 15% annual interest on overdue accounts. And this is a corporate policy across ARMA. And we have a variety of payment options to make sure you can meet your obligations. So as I conclude the presentation portion on today's webinar on fees, I'll just give you a quick overview on what you can expect in the survey that's released shortly after today. So similar to last year, the key question we're looking for your input on is related to the split of the oversight fee when it comes to flat fee and variable fee combination. So this is the primary question we ask you to answer in the survey. And what this does is giving you an opportunity to input how we set our flat rate and our variable rate. So the way we do our flat fee contribution is a percentage of the total cost recovery revenue for either program. In our proposed number, we are looking to recover 2% of the oversight fee cost in either PPP or HSP through the flat fee. So we identify the program requirement for either HSP or PPP, and we look at the 2% of that volume or of that fee amount, pardon me. And based on the number of producers, that's how we determine what the flat fee amount is. In last year, so we gave producers the opportunity to select between 1%, 2%, and 5%. And we actually ended at different places for each program. So I think PPP ended at 2%. And HSP went all the way to 5%. In addition to the flat fee, we also give you the opportunity to provide us input on the threshold where producers should be starting to pay the variable fee. So the options presented are either 35% of producer pay flat fee and 65% pay variable fee, or 40% pay flat fee and 45%, pardon me, and 55% paying the variable rate. So it is a matrix of the combination between flat and variable fee, and depending on which option you prefer, that affects both the flat fee amount as well as the variable fee rate. Before we go to questions, I do want to provide a quick non-fee related update regarding our upcoming 2026 supply report. So we are trying to take a more thoughtful and risk-based approach to verify supply reports. And we are still in the process of evaluating whether an annual verification makes the most sense, or we transition to a targeted risk-based model that focuses on areas with the greatest potential for variance or compliance risk. So given that work being underway, we are going to defer our 2026 verification requirements for next year. So that will follow a similar process to this year, where you will need to submit an attestation at the time of your supply report rather than a verification. And once we decide on the direction, we will communicate more on what this looks like. So this isn't necessarily a pause in verification. We're trying to build a smarter, more effective verification system that supports the long-term program integrity, while giving you trying to alleviate that unnecessary administrative burden for producers as well. So with that, I will pass it back to Kayla to help moderate any questions you may have. Kayla, I think you're still muted.
I am. Thank you. Thanks for that, Victor. That was great. We do have a couple of questions coming in through the Q&A, so I'll read these out to you, and then just a reminder to folks to please get any other questions into the Q&A as well, and we'll be sure to get those addressed. The first one here is a bit of a two-parter. It says, why is a new registrant required to report supply volume for previous years before they were registered? Wouldn't the manufacturer of the product be reporting this volume already for a producer that is a redistributor?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I'll maybe answer the second question first. So for the EPR framework, we only look at the obligated producer. So unlike something like a stewardship program, EPR has a hierarchy of who needs to report. So if the brand owner, which is usually the highest on the hierarchy across jurisdictions, they would be the obligated party to report and pay oversight fees. So if the brand owner did not register, chances are, even if a retailer or importer has, if they know they're not the highest on the hierarchy, there's a good chance they might not pay or have paid already. So generally what happens is we look at, for any given brand, when that brand was first supplied into the province, and that determines where their oversight fee obligations start. With that being said, we do look at both retailers, importers, as well as general brand owners on if there are any pre-existing payments, if they actually did report and pay. But that's something we generally look at a case-by-case basis.
Excellent. Thank you. We have a couple of questions come in regarding the verification procedure. So the first one here says, I would like to ensure I heard you correctly that we do not need to complete the verification procedures for 2026. We will report the same way we did last year.
Yes, that's correct.
Perfect. And then the second one here is, if the 2026 verification is deferred, how does this impact producers who have already submitted for previous years?
Yeah, so we did have a number of producers who did submit a verification plan, and they are actually very useful for us to help us inform as we do analysis. So any producer who did submit those considerations will be given in what that looks like for them when the new system is in place, right? So if we do go to an annual verification approach, they would have met their first year obligation. That's kind of what we did this year. And for the risk-based audit, we'll kind of look at how that translates when we build that.
Perfect. Another one just come in here. Can you provide more info on the underlying reasons for the large negative adjustment to the 2023 supply data?
So essentially, a producer had incorrectly reported, and I'll say it was a unit of error mistake. Is really why it was such a large discrepancy. But given that it is our first year, right, we kind of look at that. We did try to reach out to all of the producers who does have that material impact, and at the time they actually confirmed that the measurement was correct. But unfortunately, when we issued the fees, that's when they kind of took a further look as well. And that's when they realized there was the error. So that's kind of why it was adjusted after the fact. And so it's not an issue I anticipate going forward as we've kind of moving on into the more mature system, and producers understand and have a better idea of how the reporting works and the calculations they should use.
Perfect, thanks. We do have a couple questions here just about the variable rate. So does the variable rate apply to only supply above the threshold weight?
Yeah, great question. Variable rate does apply to all supply volume. So once you exceed the threshold, it applies to your total supply volume that we reported this year.
Perfect. And a clarifying question here. What are ARMA's oversight fees for? And does this include recycling?
So ARMA's oversight fee includes the cost to manage the system for oversight. So individual pros, depending on the program that you're part of, they manage the cost of recycling, or what we refer to as the common collection system. So the collection and processing of materials, that fee comes from individual pros. And you as an individual producer will have a fee for recycling with them. For us, since ARMA is the designated body by the government of Alberta for oversight, our activity is specifically ensuring that the system is working as intended. So our oversight fee is specific to our function here at ARMA, and specifically to activities related to EPR operations.
Excellent. Just have a couple more questions here for you. The first one here is, can you please send me the recording of this webinar? So where will folks be able to find this once we conclude today?
Yeah, so we have a dedicated page on our website for fee consultation. It will be posted on the website there, and my team, I'm sure, can also send a link to that website. So the webinar should be posted later today.
Excellent. Another question here for verification. So it says, in respects to verification, the term deferred is used. This means all previous years may still need verification, 2023, 24, 25, in the future, if not yet completed as of yet. Is this correct?
I'd say that's a fair assumption. For us, we certainly recognize accuracy of producer reporting is important to all parties involved, especially because one producer's reporting can affect everyone else in the system. So, we may look at what verification should look like in terms of how many years we go back. But at the same time, if we do anticipate that there may be concerns with a specific producer's verification, we always have the ability to go further back when it comes to audit, right? So I think we were still looking at how far back we want to go when we set our normal cadence, but I do want to highlight that we can always go back to as many years as we need up to the first year if we do have concerns with any given producer's accuracy.
Perfect. We actually had another one come in through the Q&A, so that's great. Just a reminder for folks that if you have any questions, to just pop them in here and we'll address them live. So this one says, when calculating the supply volume, what are we measuring the weight of? The weight of all hazardous products sold, or just the packaging of that hazardous product?
Yeah, when it comes to HSB, it is the weight of all hazardous products sold, not just the packaging.
Perfect. All right. And then I have a last one here for you. This one says, I am a producer, but I have not registered yet. What should I do to become compliant and pay oversight fees?
Yeah, great question, and appreciate you reaching out as a non-registered producer. So you can reach out to us if you have questions on understanding your obligation. We have a team that can help you all the way through registration to reporting process. But I certainly encourage you to register as soon as possible. Once you register, and if you have questions about what materials you have that may be considered obligated, once you have an understanding of what designated materials you may have, then you'll need to determine the volume of those materials that were supplied into the province. The first year that you would need to look at for supply reporting is dependent on when you started supplying that material into the province. And it's a later date of either when you supplied or when the regulation came into effect. So essentially, if you started supplying prior to 2022, you would need to report starting in the 2022 year all the way up to 2024 currently. But if you started operating in the province after 2022, then that would be the date. And then depending on the calendar year, of course, that kind of dictates when your first supply report year is. For any previous year, the oversight fee amount in terms for individual producers, your flat fee and variable fee is already set. So our website does have all of our fee rates for previous years, and that would essentially apply for each year going into the current year.
Excellent. Thanks. All right, no more questions have come in, so we're just going to wrap up this webinar today. So thanks again, Victor, for the presentation, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. It was a great conversation, and we really appreciated your participation through the Q&A. As mentioned, the recording from this session will be available later on the ARMA website for those who want to revisit the conversation. And likewise, for additional EPR information, you can visit the ARMA website or connect directly with the ARMA team for any questions or concerns that you may have. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us.